The cold taste of salt was a constant companion, a presence more reliable than the fleeting sun. It coated the lips, stiffened the worn leather of the seek's sheath resting on the rower's thwart, and slicked the exposed planks of the deck until they glistened like dark obsidian. 40 men, hardened not just by war, but by the far more brutal crucible of the North Sea, moved with a kind of practiced, heavy grace on the longship's open spine. They were packed shoulder to shoulder, each movement a careful avoidance of a neighbor's elbow, a coiled rope, or the slick arc of spray, yet each man occupied his own small, essential space in the rhythmic machine of the ship. The great, carved dragon head at the bow cleaved the massive, surging waves with a sound like tearing linen, a powerful, continuous whisper against the wind's roar. And the wind itself, a relentless, icy presence, was the ship's greatest ally and its worst enemy. This was not a pleasure cruise, nor a short hop between fjords. It was a journey of days already past and perhaps weeks still to come, traversing the cold in different waters toward the trading settlement of Jorvik. Every man from the weathered Strymar holding the steering or to the youngest shield-bearer clinging to the rail was acutely aware of the conditions. The total lack of true shelter, the constant, bone-deep damp, and the simple, brutal fact of living in a confined, pitching space with 60 other humans. A lesser crew, or a ship built with the enclosed spaces of later eras, would have quickly descended into a plague-ridden misery. Sickness was the swift reaper of the sea, yet the Vikings had earned their dominion over the waves through a hard, practical knowledge that had nothing to do with runes or sacrificial rituals, and everything to do with clean decks, circulating air, and safe water. It was a centuries-old, unwritten contract with the sea: respect the necessity of order, or perish from the filth that accumulates. Olaf, a rower whose hands were monstrously calloused and perpetually stained with the sticky black tar of continuous maintenance, paused in his rhythmic stroke. The shifting of the wind meant a brief respite, a moment to wipe the stinging brine from his eyes. He reached for his personal, stoppered leather waterskin a Lederfed and dipped his small wooden ladle into the opening, taking a careful, measured draught. It wasn't pure water from a closed barrel, stagnant for a week under the changing temperatures of the voyage, could turn foul and venomous, breeding unseen horrors. Instead, Olaf drank a thin, slightly cloudy liquid weak ale, low in alcohol, sometimes mixed with fermented whey, known as Skyer. It was thin, slightly sharp, and deeply refreshing, tasting faintly of grain and sour milk. The alcohol content was negligible, just enough to ensure that the barrel's contents remained a friend, not a foe. It wasn't for revelry, it was for life. Every man understood, without needing a scholar's explanation, that the mild fermentation was their shield against the sickness that haunted land-bound settlements reliant on shallow, stagnant wells. That small, daily act of drinking fermented grain was their crucial survival tactic, a biological defense in an age before anyone knew what the word bacteria meant. They had learned, through generations of grim trial and error, that the brew survived the journey better than the spring water they had started with. The longship's open design, which seemed to the uninitiated like a reckless exposure to the elements, was in fact the core of their survival strategy. There were no enclosed holds for the crew, only the narrow space below the deck for ballast, cargo, and stored gear. The men lived entirely on the open deck, exposed to the sky. This meant the same wind that drove the great, square, woolen sail swept across the deck constantly, unimpeded. It was a natural ventilator, a tireless cleaner that carried away every foul scent and, more importantly, prevented the air from stagnating. There was nowhere for illness to gather, no close, damp corner for a lingering cough to settle and spread its poison to the next man sleeping beside it. The open design demanded a constant awareness of the elements and a willingness to endure the biting cold, but it gave health in return, exchanging comfort for clean air. When the inevitable need arose, a man simply moved to the railing. It was done quickly, privately as possible, turning his back to the crew and looking out at the churning, vast gray. It was not a crude action, it was practical, a necessity governed by the rhythms of the sea. The North Sea, the great, moving, self-cleaning ocean, accepted it instantly. The sheer speed of the Nor, the swift current beneath the sleek hull, and the immediate dispersal meant that human waste never lingered long enough to attract flies, foul the planks, or contaminate their living space. It was a simple, elegant system of immediate disposal, putting the environment to work as their constant scullion. A Viking longship, in this regard, was far cleaner than the muddy, refuse-strewn streets of any contemporary European city. Mealtime was a brief, utilitarian affair, governed by strict rationing. The food was meager but enduring, a small handful of flat brow, a type of hard, thin bread baked without leavening. Dried strips of cod or haddock, tough as leather and tasting intensely of salt. And perhaps a spoonful of sour-curd skyr or butter packed in large wooden asker tubs. These foods were chosen for their endurance, not their flavor. They were preserved by drying, salting, and fermenting processes that inhibited the decay that would consume fresh food. Nothing was wasted, but anything deemed unfit a crust to stale to chew, a sliver of fish that tasted faintly off, was tossed immediately into the gray, churning wake. The Jarl was as strict about this as the lowest rower. Decay was not tolerated. It was a source of illness, and illness was a source of death. Discipline, in this respect, was paramount. The rule was absolute. The deck was to be kept clean of all organic detritus. No bones, no scraps, no uneaten portions remained to become a breeding ground for insects or mold. While inland medieval castles wrestled with the problem of refuse pits and kitchen middens, the Viking ship possessed an infinitely moving, self-renewing disposal system beneath its keel. Even when the day was at its harshest, when the spray froze in their beards and the skin of their hands cracked, the routine of personal care was not abandoned. Archaeology, centuries later, would find countless combs, tweezers, and ear spoons alongside the battle axes in graves. They were warriors, yes, but they were also careful, pragmatic people. As the watch changed and a new shift of rowers took the long, heavy oars, Ragnar, a veteran of several seasons at sea, took his small, carved antler comb from his simple kit bag, secured inside a waterproof skin. He worked it slowly through his heavy, tangled beard and his long hair, then used the iron tweezers to pull out a rogue splinter from his thumb, a risk posed by the rough planks. His crewmates did the same. These were not vanities, they were practical acts. Clean hair meant fewer lice. Clean hands wiped down with a scrap of sailcloth, and if the weather allowed, a brief, less punishing wave dipped in the stinging cold seawater before eating meant less chance of the internal sickness that could quickly render a rower useless. They understood, instinctively, that a clean body was a resilient body, and resilience was the difference between a successful journey and a watery grave. The greatest struggle and the point of highest danger was keeping the bedding dry. Their bedding leather-covered bags filled with dried moss, wool, or sometimes feathered down was the only barrier between a man's core temperature and a chilling, life-sapping sickness. At the first sign of rough water, when the waves began to break over the Los Lung railing, everything was swiftly wrapped in oiled skins, the precious Vamel cloth they used for trade, and lashed down high on the cross beams or piled securely under the central mast. A wet crew was a sick crew, and a sick crew meant a stalled ship, doomed to be carried off course and broken on the rocks. The Strymar demanded that every man check his neighbor's lashing, reinforcing the sense of collective responsibility. This wasn't just a life of raiding and glory at this moment. It was a testament to the quiet, ceaseless work of nautical survival. The Vikings sailed further, stayed out longer, and weathered storms that would have grounded or sunk other fleets of the time, not just because of their robust, flexible ship design, but because of their internalized knowledge of sanitation and discipline. They had figured out how to make the toughest environment on Earth work for them, using the wine to cleanse the air, the moving water to cleanse the deck, and careful fermentation to cleanse the drink. On the long voyages, such as the initial terrifying journey to settle Iceland or the slow crawl to the green shores of Greenland, the principles remained exactly the same, only the duration changed. When the food stores inevitably dwindled, the men's resolve was tested, but their discipline and hygiene held. Whenever possible, they made landfalls brief, desperate stops on lonely shores. These moments were not rest, but feverish activity, repairing the clinker-built hull, fetching fresh wood, and refreshing the water barrels. Crucially, these were opportunities to boil food and clean their gear thoroughly away from the confined spaces of the ship. They would set up temporary shelters, drying their heavy woolen tunics and sorting through the food stores, ensuring nothing spoiled. They knew that a brief, intense burst of cleaning on land prevented weeks of misery at sea. Their longship was not a floating camp of filth and squalor, as might be found in later medieval ships with their pestilential enclosed holds and stagnant bilges. It was a highly sophisticated, practical machine of endurance, kept running by the simple, ancient knowledge that discipline and a scrupulous order were the true keys to staying alive at sea. As the sun set once more, painting the massive wall of water ahead a deep, bruised purple, Olaf felt the cold, but also the strange, deep sense of security that came from organized control. Waste did not accumulate. Air did not stagnate. The ale did not spoil. The food, though hard, did not rot. They had not been lucky. They had been disciplined. Their success didn't come only from strength or courage, but from practical knowledge, keen observation, and a deep understanding of the environment they lived in. The journey was difficult, but it was not chaotic. It was managed, every sip, every stroke, every discarded scrap governed by an unwritten code of survival. They were the masters of their domain, not because they conquered the sea, but because they understood how to live cleanly upon it. And for that, for the silent genius of their survival, they would reach Jorvik alive, ready to trade, raid, or settle, having defeated the unseen enemy disease that had claimed the lives of countless sailors and soldiers before them.